Hello, here we are again in my garden. This time it's autumn. So a few more clothes on, faded leaves, but there's still stuff going on in the garden. Just because summer's over, it doesn't mean that growing is over. Now, what I really want to show you this time is how one crop follows another, how various overwintering things go in immediately after, or a little bit later than some things that were here in the summer. And here we have the garlic. I put the chicken netting there to stop the cats pooing on it. Cats love a bit of bare soil to poo into. Now, you see here, little garlic plants just coming up. Not all of them are up yet. The thing about garlic is if you get in really early, sometimes it doesn't show for months. But that doesn't mean it's not growing. It's growing down there, it's putting out roots, it's building up its strength. And because we've had a very mild autumn, the shoots have come up. But in some years, they don't come up till the end of February. So this went in, let me see, that would have been October, when I just harvested the sweet corn from here. The garlic went in more or less immediately. You want to get the garlic in any time from the end of September onwards, so it gets that long time in the ground and is able to build up. So this is part of how you put the rotation together, the rotation of crops, the way one crop follows another. Now, this little place here possibly is not ideal for garlic. It's not very sunny, but the garlic needs to be here for the purposes of rotation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later on when we have a look at my garden notebook. So that was one little winter crop. There's another one over here, which is a combination of spring cabbage and lamb's lettuce. So the crop in here before this was broad beans, which were harvested about the end of June. There was a bit of a gap, and then in October in went the spring cabbage. You sow that in August, plant it out in October. It's a great way of avoiding the slugs with your cabbage crop. Anyway, another thing I like about this is another of my combinations. So I've got a combination of the spring crop and then a shorter term winter crop, the lamb's lettuce, lovely salad plant. It'll grow between these plants. Chop it and eat it during the winter for a salad, and then in the spring the cabbage plants will grow and fill up all the space. And then I take out every other cabbage plant as spring greens and let the rest go on as hearted cabbage. Very good way of getting yourself an early summer cabbage crop without having to struggle with the slugs, because they're not a problem in the autumn, whereas they are in the spring. And here we have a couple of empty beds. This is the one where I had sweet corn and squash, and that is the one where I had runner beans, but they're not going to be empty for very long. I have some seeds with me. Now these summer crops have been out for a little while, and I could have sown this a little bit earlier, but you don't want to, this is broad beans. You don't want to sow broad beans too early. November is just right. If you sow them earlier, they get tall quickly, and then if a winter frost comes along, that can damage them. So it's a good idea to wait till about the middle of November. Okay, so in go the broad beans, and using my trowel to measure them out. Broad beans, big seed, wants to go deep, about 5 centimetres, 2 inches. I won't plant one there because I've already got an edible plant coming up there. Move, Rico. Want to plant some seeds there. And so I'm putting them in, I'm using my handy measuring trowel, which is 18 inches long in old money. And so they want to go 9 inches apart. So I measure 18 inches and then I estimate the one in the middle. So that's about 22, 23 centimetres apart. And the second row is just halfway between the two outside ones. So that'll give me 3 rows of beans in this bed. So I'm going to do something slightly different in the next bed. Here, what I'm doing is not sowing an edible crop, but a green manure. Actually, I'm going to use the same seed, but the purpose of this is just simply to keep this bed in good heart through the winter. A green manure is a crop that you grow not to eat, but to improve the soil or maintain its fertility. Now, one green manure that you can use over the winter is field beans, and field beans, quite honestly, are just the same as broad beans, except the seed's a bit cheaper, but I got some of this left over. I haven't got any field beans, so in they go. And I'm going to put them closer together because they're not going to grow to maturity. They're just going to be in here till, let's see, probably put brassicas in here. They'll probably be in here till May, I should think, maybe, or early June. So even though they might look as though they're going to crop, I won't crop them because that's not the priority in this bed. This time they're going in closer together because they're not going to be grown to maturity. So holes about 15 centimetres apart, 6 inches, and it's just the same as before. So that's only one example of a green manure. There are other green manures that you can use at different times of the year for different purposes. There's all sorts of things they do. They hang on to those nutrients that are in the soil and could otherwise be washed out by rain. Beans and the bean family fix nitrogen. They increase the amount of nitrogen in the soil. And of course, these will also produce plenty of organic matter in the spring that I can chop and put in the compost heap. So there's lots of different things that green manures do. So, what we've been looking at is all part of planning what crop follows which. And you can sum that up in a single phrase, it's crop rotation. And I keep a record of my crops in this little book. Now, in theory, with crop rotation, you have one bed for beans, one for squash, one for chard, one for onion family, and one for cabbage, and they rotate around. In practice, it doesn't work out like that, as neatly as that. And the main thing to really be aware of is not to follow one crop with the same thing in 3 families. Just 3 families you need to worry about. There's the brassicas, the cabbage family. There's the onion family, including leeks and garlic. And then there's the potato family. And so really what these records show me is how long is it since this bed had one of those 3? And I just try and make it as long as possible because those 3 families have pests or diseases which affect the roots. You may have noticed I just put in beans after beans. Doesn't matter. It's good to spread your beans around more than that if you can, because then you spread that valuable nitrogen fixing element more widely in the garden. But that's what I had, that's the space I had to put in that green manure. Didn't want to leave it open, unoccupied during the winter, so I put them in. Doesn't matter. So you can be quite relaxed about crop rotation. But one thing which I think is important is to try and plan things so you don't get half a year with an empty bed. So if something finishes early, you can get something in immediately after it. And that's the way of keeping your garden productive. This goes along with growing mixed crops, which I have shown you before. You want to keep your garden so it's always growing something edible. So, that's that for crop rotation. But if you want to learn a bit about pruning vines and raspberries and a bit about how I look after my tools, watch the next video.